Though in preschool I very much did not want to get up on the stage for the music program because I didn't know the hand motions, I still quickly developed a love for the limelight. Throughout my youth, I did my fair share of acting, public speaking, and even caught the entrepreneurial bug early on. As a young person, I was shaped by the book Do Hard Things, which advocated that Christian young people should, well, do hard things like fundraise for good causes, build nonprofits, get out of the world with big, amazing things. It seemed to imply that good Christian kids did these giant, wild, noticeably amazing, awesome things for God. And it made sense to me. I founded my own nonprofit at 15 and tried to do great big things for God all the time. I would tell people I want to be famous, though I explained it wasn't for the money, but so I could use my fame for Jesus. Fast forward to now, and I've been humbled many times in my pursuit of greatness, but admittedly, I still struggle to not see myself as the main character, the star of the show, the hero of the story. Today's guest author and children's minister, Melinda Fugate, reminds us that even the small things we do are valuable. God works in more ways than just through the so-called main characters. A lot of action is still happening to the side characters and extras, if we just pay attention. Welcome to Theology Meets World, hosted by me, Jake Doberenz. This podcast delves into the heart of real-life issues with theologians, ministers, activists, and writers who share their unique stories and insights. Keep up with the show at jakedoberenz.com/TMW and subscribe to updates and weekly funny newsletters at jakedoberenz.substack.com. Don't forget to rate and review the show and share it with your friends and your enemies. Now, back to your regularly scheduled programming. Malinda, it is great to have you on the podcast.
It is fantastic to chat with you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We've been Facebook friends for some reason, randomly for a while, and it's good to have the face-to-face, voice-to-voice kind of connection.
I agree. I don't even know how we ended up as Facebook friends, but I'm very glad we did.
Yeah, who knows these days, right? I will admit I'm probably a little bit, maybe sometimes too liberal with my Facebook requests these days. But, hey, I get to meet cool people, and so win-win-win. It's great.
Agreed.
Great. Well, without further ado, let's just jump in. Melinda, as a kid, you loved storytelling and had an interest in theater. This blossomed... Start that over. As a kid, you loved storytelling and had an interest in theater. This blossomed into an early career in radio, film, and TV. You were determined to make it in a difficult industry. But then God had other plans. Tell us about your transition to children's ministry and what you learned in that career pivot.
Your description of growing up was very familiar. I was immediately transferred back to youth group days. And that combination of what we were told, even in high school and middle school, that we're going to grow up and be world changers and do big things, and then combine it with our faith and we're doing big things for Jesus. And it's a lot of pressure and expectations. And it sets us up with this mentality of main characterness, which I know we're going to come back to. And so I took that and ran with it too. And I thought, I love telling stories. What better way to tell stories than on the stage? And I can bring glory to the Lord by telling his stories as well. And so one thing led to another, from the high school theater stage through college to moving to LA and getting involved in film and TV production, working in radio. And I just thought, I'm going to buckle down. I'm going to do this. I'm going to have the perseverance to get through in this industry. However, as I was in school, I worked part-time at a church doing children's ministry, and I thought it was just going to be a temporary thing until I shifted into the goals and the dream career kind of thing. But when I finished getting my AA for film production, I was offered a full-time position doing children's ministry. And with prayer, it seemed like it was the right thing to do. And as it turns out, it was. That's been 14 years, and I'm still working at the same church doing full-time children's ministry.
That is impressive and very needed. Just the continuity of ministry, of people hanging out in one area. That's beautiful. Always something to celebrate, most definitely. But another thing to celebrate is kids ministry. Kids ministry is not for the faint of heart. I have not been in that role myself, but I have taught little munchkins at church and at school, and oh boy, not for the faint of heart. Though it can be fun and silly, I do know that it is a lot of work. So because I'm curious, what lessons have you learned about God and about yourself as a children's education director?
It is a very long list, so I'll try to just go with the highlights. But after 14 years, God is teaching me a lot of things. I think one of the biggest things that I've learned and I've tried to pass on to the kids is that we need to always be curious, always ask questions, always seek understanding, and that's how we build our faith. I felt like one of the messages I got growing up was that too many questions indicated that we had doubt, and so we wanted to avoid that. But I feel like our faith is strengthened the more we ask, the more we puzzle and wrestle with things, and I want to instill that in the kids as well, so that it's a skill they have growing up. But on that note, I've also learned to be at peace with the I don't know, or I don't know yet, and trusting in God's goodness based on his very, very consistent pattern of goodness that he has demonstrated, and that we can not freak out because we don't understand something yet. Playfulness and joy and laughter, unconditional love, listening more than speaking. The list just goes on. These kids are pretty good teachers. 100% absolutely agree. Agree with all of your points, but hey, that laughter one is definitely one that I appreciate. We try to have fun here at Theology Meets World, and in my weekly newsletter, Funny and Faithful, which is appropriately named, or maybe it's Faithful and Funny. I never remember the name of my own newsletter, so that's okay. Why don't we take a swim into today's topic? You wrote a book recently, Stories from the Sidelines. It's about the biblical characters that aren't in the limelight, that don't get taught a lot, they don't get stained glass windows, etc. So why did you write a book about those guys and gals? It goes back to that curiosity and asking questions and always learning. And sometimes when I find something I've learned that is exciting, I am just driven to share it. And that is how it kind of led to being a book. So combining my curiosity with people that we haven't really talked much about, and then my own personal journey, my struggles, looking for purpose and understanding what God's doing in seasons that are difficult, I started to put two and two together, because when we understand what's going on in those seasons, I feel like we find value and encouragement in those seasons, but also we need it to know like where we're going in the future, like what's our next step. So I began a quest to humanize the people that we often find on the sidelines. I actually halfway through stopped using the word character because it made them seem so fictional. And I realized the more time I spent with them, how relatable and how real when we really sit down and examine their stories, that these are real people who just happened to live a really long time ago.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's a good point about that word character, how that can trip us up sometime or make us miss the reality there. Well, I don't think it's too complicated to say that Christians have kind of a hero worshiping problem, whether it's, politicians or pastors, whoever, authors, leaders. They can be elevated to levels where they can seemingly do no wrong. And you mentioned in the introduction of your book that when we talk about so-called biblical heroes, we can often just ignore some of their flaws straight out, just talk about how good and wonderful they are and how much we should be like them. So how do you think we as a church can use the story of these relatively unknowns as a way to kind of counteract our rampant hero worship?
I think it's a good way to remember that with God, there are no hierarchies with people. We've created that societally and humanly, but we are all made in God's image, that there is an equality there that is often distorted or overlooked depending on the situation. And so we are designed to love in that perspective, to love each other as we have that in common. We're image bearers, and there's no superiority happening. When we remember that there are different giftings, we remember Paul's analogy of the body. Like, if the whole body was an eye, how would it get anywhere? And when we look at other people's giftings as different instead of superior, I think that also safeguards us against the hero worship. We're not putting anybody up on a pedestal. It's almost as if instead of looking on the ground up at somebody who is doing what we think are amazing things, we can pray for God's perspective of looking down from above and seeing us all on a level playing field. Remembering James 2 talking about no favoritism, or in Galatians, neither Jew nor Greek, male or female. We've created these hierarchies. And once we get rid of that and we are praying to see through God's eyes, I think that is going to kick hero worship to the curb.
Yes, we have created these hierarchies, absolutely. And they distort that identity of being image bearers of God, and it can make us miss things. And I appreciate you bringing in the language of body too, because we need everybody. Those who are up front, those who are behind the scenes, this and that. We are all the body of Christ, even when maybe we still need the parts that aren't as glamorous. I remember in youth group, I once said that a girl, maybe she was the toenail of Christ, and okay, she didn't like that very much. Publicly want to apologize to Maddie there. Sorry about that. But the point I was trying to make is that, hey, we need all the parts, even the ones that we don't like to talk about, and have to clip occasionally. I don't know. Don't take that metaphor too far there. So let's look at one of the characters in the book. You got a lot. And I just said characters. Let's look at one of the people in your book. You have a lot of different ones that you cover, but let's just discuss one of them. Let's discuss Huldah. And I'll confess, I have 2 degrees in biblical studies, but don't know a lot about this prophetess woman. I do remember the name, and she is featured in 2 Kings 22, 14 through 20, and 2 Chronicles 34, 22 through 28. So, what does Huldah get up to in the Bible? What does her story teach us?
I have so many times learned when I was growing up, as well as teaching in children's ministry, about King Josiah. We love King Josiah. He starts out young. He has an interesting story. He's following God. We can cheer for him, unlike so many other kings. But a lot of times, Huldah, who is part of his story, doesn't even get mentioned. And if she does, it's just a blip. So to catch all of us up, so we're on the same page. So we know King Josiah comes in and, Israel's a mess. And he is cleaning out the temple. They find the book of the law and they read the book of the law. He hears all of the things that they have not been doing to follow God. And he's completely distraught. And so he seeks a word from Huldah, who is a prophet, to say, what does the Lord say about this? And so he sends his officials to her. They talk to her and she verifies that, yes, what you read, that's the word of the Lord, and the consequences of not following God, that's going to happen. But because you are seeking God, you will have peace in your lifetime and the consequences will come after. And so there's a little bit of reassurance for Josiah, but also like the consistency of God's justice and his promise. And that's where we stop hearing about Huldah. But if we really think about it, she didn't just materialize at that moment, and she didn't just stop existing once we turn the page. So she is a contemporary of a couple other prophets who Josiah could have gone to them, but he didn't. He chose Huldah. And so the question I had was why? So clearly she had to have built up trust with the king. So she is prophesying, demonstrating that she is the real deal. She is representing God and listening to God and delivering his word. So she has a trust with King Josiah. I wonder if it's possible, since he started at such a young age, that if she was part of who was advising him as he was growing up and into his position as king. We have no information on that, or at least that I haven't found. But as I was writing stories from the sidelines, I wanted to employ prayerful imagination to research as much as I could, but recognizing that because these people are so little known, there's not as much information about them. So researching as much as I can, being prayerful, trying to fill in the cracks the best I can with what we know about being human. And so, of course, Huldah would have watched as they make all the temple repairs, how Josiah restores the law so that he is leading the people to follow God. And she would have been there for all of that too. So there's so much that we can take from the story. For me, it was that importance of listening for God, like really listening and having that confidence that we have heard him. That takes so much listening and time, and to be able to speak his truth, even to power. Like, how intimidating would that have been to tell the king, like, it's not all good news. There are going to be consequences, but Huldah still spoke what God spoke to her. And also that our small acts of faithfulness lead to the next step. And that's something we've heard before. And it's often framed with, he is, faithful in small things, will be given greater responsibilities or greater things. But I think that also takes our eyes off the fact that those small faithfulnesses, if that's a word, they lead to sometimes other small acts of faithfulness. And it's not the size, it's the consistency of one after another, taking each step, continuing to be faithful to God, and knowing that as we do that, he's leading us in his purposes and his plans, and he says those are good. So I could go on and on about Huldah. She's one of my favorites, but those were a couple things that I really learned from her.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn, as your whole book demonstrates, from these micro stories, from these people that we kind of see appear and disappear when we flip the page, like you mentioned. And I think Huldah is certainly a very interesting one. It reminds me of so many of the wisdom I've gleaned through various women in my life who probably wouldn't call themselves prophets, prophetesses, but who nonetheless speak the word of the Lord. I have gone on record saying that I collect grandmas like Thanos collects Infinity Stones. I want them all. Maybe that's a Pokemon reference there, but I'm mixing my metaphors. The point is, it's important to listen, even to women who often have lived quiet lives of faithfulness and have gained all this wisdom. I'm going to say, hey, what do you got to say about this? So I appreciate that in the example of Huldah and in all the women that have come before me as well.
And I think you hit on something really important. Another role of the sidelines is the people who are not in the limelight often can see things from a better perspective and have more wisdom on things that somebody distracted by leadership and all that comes with that may have missed. And you can edit this out if you don't want me to say it. Earlier, you shared a story about being encouraged by a janitor. And the more we talked about it, we realized that this janitor, from his position, had a lot of time to listen, and therefore making him a solid source on what he was talking about. And I think the same with all of these lesser known people. They also had a view that, King Josiah clearly didn't have the answers, but Huldah, from her space farther back from royalty, she was able to provide what he needed.
Yes, and I did share a story about a janitor before the episode. My middle school janitor, shout out to, not making this up, Mr. O'Malley. He was Irish. He was super cool. And he did give me some wisdom and things from his perspective. But yeah, you're right. People on the sidelines have this wisdom, the bird's eye view, the people you don't always think about they're watching, not in like a creepy way, but just they're gaining wisdom, and they're able to speak into people's lives with power. Beautiful. Melinda, what hope does Scripture offer those of us that haven't slain giants and parted seas? How do people on the sidelines, which we might be, fit into God's grand narrative?
I feel like there is every hope. And there have been times in my own struggles where I have been desperately seeking hope. And I feel like I have found some of that through these sideline stories. One of the things that God kind of taught me was that we're not looking for earthly praise, but to realize where we are in the Lord's gaze. And at first, that might feel like such high pressure, like God's watching us, we better do everything right. But instead, I picture it as maybe a proud parent or a loving grandparent, all your grandmas you're collecting, that security of knowing that we are being, I guess, supervised for our care, but also that as we follow and are obedient to God, like that blesses him. Like that is a happy thing. That is not a judgmental, we're trying to pass the test thing. That is a delight when we are on the same page as God, following his commands. The sidelines gives us hope, reframes our worldview. It gives us insight into the intricate plans and purposes that God has had in the past and how we can apply it to our present. And it gives us hope because we learn that we are valued, we are treasured by God. We're not forgotten, we're not left behind. God is always with us. Even when we feel like we're in the shadows, God's sitting right there with us. And I feel like there's so much hope just in the presence of God and what that means.
I think the truth is, too, that we should remember is that most of us are going to be sideline characters. I mean, most of us probably won't do the big, great things, get into history books. And, often I've been a history teacher. Oftentimes the people that make it into history books are not always the best ones. The people who are really doing the faithful work of God often just don't get recorded or remembered or become footnotes in history. And the reality is most of us will be that. But to your point, there's some advantages there, and there's some real hope for all of us that are not doing the great, big, super awesome, amazing things.
And God challenged me there through this project that perhaps our definition is not accurate. The things that we're describing as the heroes and the things we're classifying as the minor sidelines, background characters, the importance, the impact on God's kingdom and the world around us, those things aren't always as visible as waves of water parting or a giant crashing to the ground. But that doesn't mean they're not big. And it doesn't mean that they are any less important. And suddenly the lines between hero and sidelines are very blurry if they're there at all. And it's not about the metric we've created for a hierarchy of big things, small things. And it's just really interesting. I haven't quite wrapped my brain around it completely, to be honest, but really interesting to step back and look at these things from a completely different angle and realize that we may have been off a little on our definition.
Oh, I think we've been off a lot. Most definitely, you're right. Our priorities have gotten out of whack. It is human nature that has creeped into the church that we elevate some people and devalue others. But there is no hierarchy in the body of believers. We're all important. And God, often in Scripture, how many times does God take the second-born or take the lonely, the lowly, and elevate them? That's how the game's played. So, Excellent reminders today, Malinda. Really appreciate that. Definitely want people to check out Stories from the Sidelines. But before we go and send people in their merry way to go to wherever good books are sold and get that, we have our final question that we leave with everybody that jumps on the show, everybody that comes to Theology Meets World. That question is this: Before we end, leave the audience with just one practical action they can do right now to live their faith fully for Jesus. What challenge do you offer our listeners to put into practice this week?
Gonna sound simple, but draw close to God and he will draw near to you. And the action part of that is to be intentional and do something new that you either haven't done in a long time or have never done before, that is taking a step or a moment to pause, to be in God's presence, be closer to God, to seek. I mean, it looks different for every person, but that intentionality, that stopping from all the crazy busyness and doing something that is new to draw closer to God, and then being in his presence.
Sounds simple, but boy, can it be hard, especially in our crazy, distracted world. Well, Melinda, now that we are done, we definitely want to point people in direction again to your book, Stories from the Sidelines. Let's just pretend that it is out now, or I know it's on pre-order even as we speak. I'm not exactly sure when this episode will be dropping. And who published that again? Can you remind me of the publisher?
Ambassador International.
Okay. And I did find it on Amazon, so you can definitely go there and all the other fun places. And tell us your website or any socials or anything like that you want people to go to if they're interested.
I absolutely love connecting with people. My website is just melindafugate.com. It's MAL and Fugate is Fugate. It's a weird name, but that is how you find me. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter if you're still, I'm not going to call it X. I can't do it.
Amen.
But I'm Mal the Star on Twitter and Mal the Writer on Instagram. So please.
Wonderful. And those will be in the show notes, as well as all the other goodies and things we mentioned today that you might want to check out. Well, this has been Theology Meets World, and we've been with Melinda Fugate, and it has been fantastic. So be sure to share this episode around, rate and review, all that jazz, because you have loved this episode, so make sure other people know about it.